All right, let's get started on today's class. So what we're going to be looking at today are the effect of schedules of reinforcement and other theories of reinforcement. So we're still in operational conditioning, but now we're going to take a look at some more intricacies and characteristics of operational conditioning, and specifically look at how the schedules of reinforcement, that is, how often or under what criteria does an organism get reinforced, how those affect the behavior that we're looking at. So that's what we're going to spend this next week on. But today we're going to start it all by taking a look at the upcoming Snippy assignments that you're going to be working on, and how they tie into some particularly weird human behavior, which is gambling behavior. So we've touched on this before. Gambling behavior was a challenge to explain in terms of reinforcement, particularly because you get less reinforcement than you put in. The way that gambling works is that the money that you put in is greater than the money that you get out. So it was a challenge to explain why people will continue to gamble even though they're losing money. So we'll take a look at what the schedules of reinforcement have to say, and what the assignments that you're going to be working on have to say about the development of a gambling addiction. We're going to see why slot machines are still designed with this kind of tumbler display system. Even though they are now mostly computerized, they still reveal their matches, one column at a time. So we'll see why that structure is still in play. And then we'll also take a look at how the implications of treating a gambling addiction, what those implications are, and what informs some of the policies that certain organizations or certain treatments that deal with addiction institute. So for example, Alcoholics Anonymous is well known for its policy of abstinence from alcohol. So it's not that you get your alcohol consumption under control, you just never consume alcohol again. So we'll see the principle underlying that idea and why it makes psychological sense. All right, but before we get to that, I just want to let everybody know that we are now officially opening the Kingston Assignment. So we paid for the subscription. It's full steam ahead for the rest of the semester. And thank you to everybody that completed what's on your bucket list. I'm going to award some points for that, just because those were everybody that got the ball rolling. But specifically for exam number 1 and exam number 2, I'm going to open up the exam number 2 assignment over the next couple of days. I just want to go over what's expected for those assignments. So if you want to earn points towards exam number 1, do the exam number 1 comic. If you want to earn points towards exam number 2, do the exam number 2 comic. You can do both. It's up to you what you want to take advantage of. But I do want you to know that there are some stipulations. So it's not as open-ended as the what's on your bucket list assignment. There are some stipulations. So the first thing is that it has to be on a topic that was covered in exam number 1. So it could be on a theory, it could be on a concept, it could be on a particular experiment, it could be on the classical conditioning procedure, but it has to be a comic that helps to explain or illustrate that particular theory or concept. Which one you choose is completely up to you. So there's no restriction other than it had to have been covered either in the lectures leading up to exam number 1, or you can alternatively choose something from the readings that were assigned for exam number 1, but it has to be limited to one of those topics. The comic has to be at least 1 page with at least 9 panels and contain at least 1 character. So those are all stipulations in terms of creating the comic. And then what we're going to do, or what I'm going to do, is I'm going to be grading these comics. So just to let you know what the grading scheme is, this is what you'll be assessed on. So there's three criteria. Number one, content. Did the comic correctly explain the psychology of learning material? So whatever you choose to do, did you explain it correctly? So if you say something like classical conditioning was the conditioning that Bach and Mozart received in order to play their music, incorrect, right? And if you get it, you need to get the content correct. So all of these are scored on a 1 to 6 scale. So did the comic correctly explain the psychology of learning material? 6 if you do that very well. 1 if you do that not well at all. And other numbers in between depending upon the correctness of the content. Number 2, creativity. Was the comic creative in the way it explained the concepts? So for this one, what we're doing is we're looking for your own take or your own way of explaining the material. So an example of a non-creative comic would be if you just put pictures of Pavlov's dog and explained the kind of textbook example of classical conditioning. That would be an example of a non-creative use of a comic, and you would score low on that creativity. If you could illustrate an everyday example of classical conditioning, if you could illustrate the use of habituation or sensitization in popular media, something like that. If you need to bring your own spin to the comic, it can't just be a sort of translation of a figure or a textbook example. You'll score low in terms of creativity. And then finally, there's format. How well was the comic put together? That is, how were the comic elements used? So to help you along with this, I uploaded resources into a folder in Canvas labeled, I believe it's Kingston files or Kingston resources. So there are certain rules to make a legible comic. There are certain rules in terms of the reading order. So when you're reading a comic, you go from left to right, top down. That goes for the panels, going from panel to panel, as well as within panels. So if you have conversations between characters or if you have information, make sure that it's laid out in a way that a reader, a Western reader would read correctly and in the correct order. So I noticed on some of the bucket list comics, there were conversations or information being presented, and it was being presented out of order. So you would have a, just for example, you'd have one character here with the word balloon going on fine. And you would have another character over here with the word balloon going, how are you? And this violates the left to right, top down structure. So you want to make sure that your comic is legible, that it's intelligible, that it's not confusing. And that's what that last one is, the format of it. So again, I uploaded some tips. They're short little PDFs that kind of give you tips and tricks to improve your communication ability. And that's also going to be worth 6 points towards your score on that comic. So that's what you're going to be, that's how the comics are going to be graded. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a deadline for Exam 1 and Exam 2. So the Exam 1 and Exam 2 picks and comics are due November 12th, 2018. So you have over a month to think about what you want to do, put it all together, try out different things. If it doesn't work the first time, try it again. There's always a way to tell that story. The comics will be graded according to the rubric. And whatever your score is out of 18, that's going to be translated into up to 10% towards your exam grade. So if you get 18 out of 18 and you do the exam number 1 comic, if you receive the 72 on the exam, your grade will then be an 82%. If you receive only 9 out of 18, then you only get a 5% bump on your exam number 1 grade. So try to do the best that you can, take advantage of this, take advantage of the full points, and let's see if we can get some new perspectives, some new educational materials being produced, so that not only will the creation of this actually help you understand the material better, but also might help future students when they're trying to understand that material as well. All right, any questions about the Kingston assignments? All right, and then one last thing that I'll mention. Some of you have already done this, but if you've signed up and you haven't put your real name into the Kingston account, but you have a username, I can see the usernames. Some of them are pretty obvious, but if you don't think that your username is obviously linked to your IUSB name, just send me a message in Canvas Messengers and tell me that, Funny Bunny 62 is you. All right, so if that's your username and it doesn't match up with your IUSB name, just drop me a quick line, let me know, and I'll just make a note of that so you can get the points that you deserve. All right, any final questions on the Kingston comics? All righty. So while we're on the subject of exam number 2, exam number 2 still had that little bit of a dip that I mentioned, but I just wanted to kind of update people on what happened on the review session. So I analyzed the data, took a look at it, and there was improvement. There was actually improvement. It was nice to see for students that came to the review section. So compared to students that didn't come to the review, students that came to the review, they had not that much of an improvement on section number 1. So there was about a 6% improvement on section number 1. The bulk of the improvement, however, came on section number 2. There was a 20% improvement on section number 2. And because section number 2 is more highly weighted than section number 1, that translated into a 15% improvement on the overall exam grade. So that kind of lets me know that I think the review session was successful. And thank you for everybody that attended. And I think this will be what we do going forward. So you've helped future generations by helping me figure out how to get rid of that exam 2 dip. All right, and we will be handing back exam 2 so you can take a look at it next class. All right, so let's start taking a look at chapter 7. I shouldn't be escape avoidance and punishment, but anyways, we're going to take a look at chapter 7, starting with Snippy 1 to 9 review and some additional topics, specifically the gambling behavior. So just a quick review of the previous Snippy assignments. So for Snippy exercise number 1, basic acquisition of a conditioned response. Once again, if you're looking at your grade on Snippy number 1, this is what I was looking for in terms of getting a perfect score on that assignment. So I needed to see that increase in the conditioned response. I needed to see that increase over trials of Snippy's conditioned stimulus response strength. Once you condition Snippy to turn that tone or that light from a neutral stimulus to a conditioned stimulus, you then went through a process of extinction, and that was that little area right there. So I needed to see a decrease in the strength of the conditioned response by presenting the tone, the conditioned stimulus over and over and over again, this time without the shock. And then finally, for a spontaneous recovery, you take Snippy, you put him in timeout, you bring him back, and you can see right there, we have that spontaneous recovery of the strength of the conditioned response. And all of that occurs without Snippy ever being shocked again. All right, so those are the previous ones. Let's now turn to the new, the new assignments that are coming up to be due. And we're going to tie those in again to gambling behavior. So the ones we're going to start off with, or the one we'll start with, is Snippy exercise number 4, magazine training. And magazine training is the procedure where the sound of the food dispenser in that operant chamber is turned into a secondary reinforcer by continually pairing the sound with the delivery of food pellets. So this is a classical conditioning procedure where we use the sound of the food dispenser, the fact that there is a mechanical device in these Skinner boxes that makes a sound when the bar is pressed, or makes a sound when food is delivered. You actually get that mechanical slap that tells Snippy that food has been delivered. And magazine training is where you pair the sound of that food dispenser with the presentation of food. And what that does is it makes the sound itself a reinforcer. All right, so the way that you do this, first off, start off with a naive Snippy. So just in case you get stuck on magazine training and exercise number 5, you get stuck on shaping, Snippy does come with a Snippy file that has been trained where, anybody hear what that was? Is that like a cry for help or no? All right. Snippy, where was this? Oh yeah. So the program, the installation comes with a version of Snippy, a Snippy file where he is already trained to bar press. Make sure you do not choose that Snippy file. Make sure that you choose a naive Snippy file. So you can just open up a new one. You don't have to use the one where you've already classically conditioned Snippy. Start off with a new one, and you'll go into Mind Window. You'll go into Operant Associations, and this is going to guide you in terms of how close you're getting to actually magazine training Snippy. So here we have the strength of these Operant Associations, and we have the associations of the sound with the food. We have the association of the bar press with the sound, and then we have the action strength. That's Snippy's, how much Snippy or how likely Snippy is to actually bar press. So you're going to want to open up your cumulative records. This is what I'm going to be looking for. So we went over cumulative records earlier on in this course. This is your output of Snippy's behavior. And then what you're going to begin to do is you are going to begin to feed Snippy without Snippy ever pressing the bar. So what you want to do is you basically, and these little notches here are where you've reinforced Snippy. These little notches here are where you've given Snippy food. And basically right now you're doing it for him, for Snippy not doing anything. What you want to do is you want to basically classically condition Snippy. So when Snippy is close to or looking at the food dispenser, what you want to do is you want to dispense food to Snippy. And what that's going to do is it's going to present the neutral stimulus of the sound of the dispenser with an unconditioned stimulus, which is the presentation of the food, and we're going to turn that neutral stimulus into a conditioned stimulus. So as you're doing this, you'll know you're getting closer because this bar here will get higher and higher and higher. That's the association between the sound and the food. So we need to get that to at least 75%. And as you go through it, you'll get these little encouraging notes, this little helpful advice window there. So once you get to 25%, it'll say Snippy is developing an association between the sound of the hopper and the presentation of the food. However, this association is not strong enough to properly train Snippy. So you need to keep doing it. It can take a while. Snippy might lose interest in that particular area of the cage and go away and come back. Be patient. This is the one that's very variable in terms of how long it's going to take. But basically, you want to keep feeding Snippy, presenting the sound, presenting the food. And the closer you can do that temporarily, the stronger the association is going to become. So try not to reinforce Snippy with food when Snippy is far away, when Snippy is not looking at the food. Because what you'll do is you'll present the food, he'll hear that hopper, but he won't see the food for 30 seconds. That's very low temporal contiguity. That's not going to give you a very good conditioning. So you're done once you get to 75% on this bar over here. So though Snippy appears to have developed an association between the sound of the hopper and the food, you can now use the sound as a reinforcer to shape Snippy's behavior. So once you get that note, that's when you're done. And that's when you're finished magazine training and you can go on to shaping. So again, what we're doing is, during the early conditioning portion of this, we're presenting the sound, which is a neutral stimulus, pairing it with food. Food is an unconditioned stimulus. Food causes the unconditioned response of approach. If you present Snippy with food, one of the target behaviors that he'll do is he'll actually approach the food. And then what happens after conditioning, once you reach that 75%, the sound goes from a neutral stimulus to a conditioned stimulus. And now that conditioned stimulus becomes a secondary reinforcer. So not only is it a secondary reinforcer, so it's been paired with food enough so that it can now stand in place of food, but it can also actually cause approach. So use this to your advantage. If Sniffy ever loses interest in that particular area, you can reinforce Sniffy, kind of bring him back to that area while you're doing your later training. And then while you're doing your later training, basically approach is going to be one of the operant behaviors that you're going to use during shaping. And you can reinforce approach with sound. You can actually reinforce approach with the sound of occurring. And that's going to act as a reinforcer for Sniffy. So this is actually a technique that's used widely in animal training. Basically, they have, for many animal trainers, they have a clicker. And that clicker has been paired with food over and over and over again. And what that means is that you can have very temporally contiguous reinforcement. You can reinforce a behavior immediately after it occurs. So if you're training a dog to catch a frisbee, and you throw that frisbee and it travels 50 feet, and your dog catches it, well, your dog is 50 feet away. So you might want to give it a piece of sausage, but it's going to take that dog a while to come all the way back, get that reinforcement, and you're not going to have temporally contiguous reinforcement. But if you have a clicker, as soon as that dog gets that frisbee, you can hit the clicker, speed of sound is going to be almost instantaneously reinforcing that dog, and that is one of the procedures that they use. And if anybody saw Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, I think it was, I just watched that this weekend. The trainer, Chris Pratt's character, when he was first re-encountering Blue, you notice he took out his little clicker, and every time Blue did a behavior that was calming down, he was like click, 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 click. That's basically using that clicker as a secondary reinforcer. Who knew the science of that was so sound, at least in learning theories? All right, so what does this tell us about gambling behavior? There's a reason why when you go into a casino, you can hear the slot machines. The slot machines are one of the noisiest places in the casino, and it's just a constant cacophony of sounds being played. And that is not by mistake. Those sounds are actually designed to act as secondary reinforcers. So the sounds are a conditioned stimulus that have been paired with wins, that have been paired with winning money, which is the unconditioned stimulus. Winning money leads to the unconditioned response of continuing to play. So that sound, that ding, 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 bling, bling, bong, ding, bing, bong, actually becomes a secondary reinforcer that can be used in the absence of actual wins. So every single time they play one of those rounds and they hear those ding, 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 dings, that is a secondary reinforcer. So pressing that button, playing that, doing that behavior, which is, pressing the button, gets reinforced secondarily, immediately by the ding, 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 dings, rather than actually having to pay out money. So this is one of the reasons why even when people are losing money playing on slot machines, they'll continue to play because of this secondary reinforcer. Incidentally, I might have mentioned this before, but slot machine manufacturers all came together and agreed on a particular key to put all their sounds in their slot machines so that you don't have clashing notes across different manufacturers of slot machines in any single casino. So if you ever go into a casino, sure, it sounds busy, sure, there's a lot of sounds going on, but they're all kind of work together, right? There's nothing that clashes between any of the sounds because they didn't want that conditioned stimulus to lose any of its power as a secondary reinforcer by being a punisher by just sounding really, really bad. All right, so we've magazine trained Snippy. Snippy now gets reinforced by the sound of the hopper. He's also going to be reinforced by the presentation of food. It is now time to shape Snippy to press the bar. So in shaping, this is where you train an organism to perform a target behavior that is improbable. It doesn't occur very often. And what you do is you get him or her to perform that behavior by using successive approximations to that behavior. That is, you're going to not reinforce Snippy for bar pressing, but you're going to reinforce Snippy for getting closer and closer and closer to actually bar pressing. So, start off with the file that you just saved as assignment number 4. So you want to start assignment number 5 where you just ended assignment number 4 because that Snippy is ready to go. So we go design an operant conditioning experiment. You're going to use continuous reinforcement. There's not going to be any discriminative stimuli for reinforcement or for extinction. And the recorded behavior that you want to, this is a little bit more full version than the one that you probably have, but make sure that you record press bar because we need to record that particular behavior. Snippy can do other things, like face is not something that we want to record. So we want to make sure that we're recording him pressing the bar. So once you do that, you're going to see this little output right there, continuous reinforcement for bar pressing. And then what you're going to do is you're going to start to reinforce Snippy for successive approximations to bar pressing. So this is where you can use your own creativity a little bit in terms of what you consider to be successive approximations. But I'll just give you a couple of tips. Start with something that Snippy does rather frequently at the beginning. So take advantage of Snippy's own variability in behavior. So for example, Snippy loves to roam around that operant chamber. Snippy will not stay in one place the whole time. Because of this, you can reinforce when Snippy is in the back half, the part that's closer to the bar, you can reinforce Snippy for being in that half of the chamber rather than being somewhere near the front of the chamber. So start reinforcing Snippy at the beginning for just hanging out in the back half of the chamber. Then what you might want to do is you start reinforcing Snippy for maybe standing up on his hind legs. So Snippy is going to have to go up on his hind legs to press that bar. So that might be the next thing that you reinforce Snippy for doing, going up on his hind legs. So you can see that as you go, you're going to be reinforcing Snippy not for bar pressing, but for doing these other behaviors. And then maybe you'll start reinforcing Snippy for not just hanging out in the back of the operant chamber, but hanging out specifically in certain areas of the back of the operant chamber. So for example, I believe in your manual as well, they mention, instead of anywhere in the back, maybe between this light and this speaker. Only when Snippy is between the light and the speaker, you start reinforcing that behavior. And then Snippy will spend more time between the light and the speaker. And then maybe only when Snippy is between the water dispenser and halfway between that light and that speaker over there. So again, kind of just narrow down successively the area that you reinforce Snippy for being in until Snippy is just hanging out in front of the bar, rearing up on his hind legs, hanging out in front of that bar, rearing up on his hind legs, and eventually that magical moment is going to occur where Snippy bar presses for the first time. And when Snippy bar presses, because you chose that continuous reinforcement, the food is automatically going to be dispensed. So that's what this little diagonal hash here is on the cumulative recorder. that is when Snippy actually presses the bar. So what I'm going to be looking for is I'm going to need to see reinforcement of not pressing the bar, followed up later by Snippy actually just pressing the bar on his own. So you can see that after Snippy starts pressing the bar a little bit, the association or the action strength of pressing the bar increases, and also the association between the bar and the sound. So Snippy pressed the bar, heard the sound of the dispenser. That association is getting larger as well. And while I would love to say that as soon as Snippy presses the bar, you can just stand back and enjoy the ride, you might have to shape Snippy a little bit more depending upon whether Snippy's ready for it. So you'll notice that I have to reinforce Snippy at least one more time, actually a few more times after Snippy started pressing that bar. But eventually, Snippy will start pressing the bar on his own. And at that point, you can just kind of sit back and let Snippy run. And what you want to do is let Snippy run enough so that those associations between the bar and the sound, the action strength, and the sound and the food, so that those all rise to approximately or over 75%. So once you get them over 75%, I believe at that point you'll get the notice that says that Snippy appears to be trained properly. You may now experiment with different schedule effects. I have set the bar to activate the food dispenser. So once you got Snippy trained up properly, once you have him at this point, Snippy is bar pressing, he's good to go. You can then proceed on with the rest of the assignments. All right, so one thing about exercise number 5, it might take you a while. So this is the one that is very variable. It can take some students half an hour. I've had other students email me in a little bit of distress saying they've been trying to train Snippy for 2 hours and it's still not working. Stick with the procedure, stick with that successive approximations. Don't try to ask too much of Snippy too soon. Don't say to yourself, well, I got him in the back half of the room. Now I'm only going to reinforce bar pressing. That's not what. That's not the way to do it. So kind of bring him along slowly. You can use the markers that I suggested here, but just be patient with it. It might happen sooner than later. Snippy is modeled on an actual, trying to behave like an actual rat would. So just be aware of it. Book yourself some time. Hopefully it won't take the entire period, but just give yourself some extra time to do this particular assignment. All right, and the last thing that I'll mention is I am going to be looking in the shaping of Snippy for these reinforcement of not bar presses. So that is just to ensure that you're actually shaping Snippy, because the one thing that you can also do, and this will not be worth any points, if you just leave Snippy in the operant conditioning chamber, he will eventually learn to bar press just by accident. So Snippy will brush up against the bar, he'll press it with his butt, he'll receive food, and over time, and I'm talking about, hours of time, Snippy will eventually on his own learn the contingency that if I press this bar, I'm going to get some food, and the bar press will increase. That strategy will not get you any points, because the point of this is the actual shaping of the behavior. So I will be looking for this pattern here. There has to be some reinforcement before Snippy actually starts bar pressing to get full points on the shaping assignment. All right. Any questions on shaping? Okay, so how does this tie into casino behavior? Casinos are actually very, very good at shaping behavior. So very rarely do people ever start out just playing slots, boom, 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 boom. Very rarely does anybody ever wake up and say, you know what, I think today I'm going to start playing slots. I think new thing I just want to try. It's a new life goal of mine to go and play some slots. So what casinos will do is they will gradually shape that behavior. So one thing that they do is they start off with a very basic behavior that's required. It's an approximation to actually gambling in the casino, and that is actually going to the casino. So the first thing that they have to do is they have to get you actually to go to the casino. And that's one of the reasons why casinos host events, right? That's one of the reasons why they'll have concerts, or they'll have Broadway shows that come to the casinos, or they'll have some sort of event that will get the average person, the non-gambler, to actually step foot in the casino and be reinforced for going to the casino, because that's like getting Snippy to go to the back half of the operant conditioning chamber. They just want to get you into the casino in the first place. Next thing they want to do is they want to shape your behavior to actually start gambling. So they will give you $20 in free chips if you actually sit down and play a game. So again, they're not looking for full-on bar pressing like crazy behavior, but they are trying to gradually shape you further and further to get in front of that slot machine and start pressing that button. So the big first move is getting you into the casino, and that's why casinos have events that are not gambling. That's why they'll put ads in the paper, that advertise things that appeal to non-gamblers, all in the hopes of reinforcing them for going to the casino, actually stepping foot into that area. All right. So for exercise number 5, make sure that you let Snippy run for a while. You want to make sure that these things are very strong, that they're at least all above 75% in order to go further in the assignments. All right, so we're about to take a look at why it is that we have these multiple tumblers still being used in the design of slot machines, even though they are not required whatsoever at all. But before we get to that, I just want to mention for assignment number 6, there's actually nothing to look or nothing to upload for assignment number 6. Assignment number 6 is tied directly into assignment number 5. It's my little bit of an early Christmas gift for you. But what it is, it's a visualizing Snippy's responses across the cumulative record. And what I'm going to be looking for is I'm going to be opening up your assignment number 5. You get full points for assignment number 5 as long as Snippy learns to bar press, as long as those bars are, I believe, above 75%. Check the little encouraging, helpful tips for the actual numbers. To get full points for assignment number 6, I'm going to be looking at assignment number 5, and I just want to see a clear pattern, a clear established pattern of Snippy's responses. So Snippy's responses will get very regular, right? So you can see that there is a certain slope here that Snippy's responses are occurring at. He is responding at a continuous rate. That's what I'm going to be looking at for assignment number 6. So just let Snippy run bar press until you get at least a full, window of this of his bar pressing response, and that'll get you full points for assignment number 6 as well. So just so there's no confusion, there's nothing to actually upload for assignment number 6. It's going to be tied in directly to assignment number 5. Just make sure that you let Snippy run for a little while. All right. Exercise number 7 is going to seem super cruel after you just worked so hard to do exercise number 5. And exercise number 7 is extinction. So you are going to take that wonderful bar pressing behavior that you just spent a lot of time and a lot of effort shaping and reinforcing, and you're going to go through the process of extinction so that Snippy does not bar press any longer. Don't worry, it's rather easy to get back, but this is what you're going to have to do. And I remember when I did this, when I took the psychology of learning as an undergrad, we actually had access to real rats, and I was mortified that my rat was never going to bar press again. He will, but this is kind of the classic move is kind of like that reversal design, you know, just to make sure that it's the reinforcement that's causing the behavior. So don't get disheartened, right? All that hard work that you're going to be doing, you're going to undo it, you'll redo it again. So again, save each of these exercises as you're going along. Open up exercise number 5 and go through the extinction process. So in this case, there's one thing that I want to make sure that everybody does, and that's when you go to your design and operant conditioning experiment, and you're going to click on extinction. Make sure that you mute the pellet dispenser. That's what's required for exercise number 7. You not only want to have Snippy not receive food when Snippy presses the bar, but you also want that sound to go away as well. So Snippy presses the bar and nothing happens. No food, no sound. So you want to mute the pellet dispenser, and it'll indicate that on your cumulative record. So I'm going to be looking for this, extinction muted. That's one of the keys to getting full points on this extinction assignment. Make sure that hopper is muted, and then just let Snippy run until your association between the bar and the sound and the action strength of Snippy has gone away. So look for those bars to go to 0. Once they go to 0, you can save it at that point, and you'll notice that on the cumulative recorder, Snippy is barely pressing the bar anymore, indicated by that flat line on that cumulative recorder. He's still trying a little bit. You can see he was still pressing the bar right over there. So it doesn't have to be completely flat. Look for these bars up here to go away. The association between the sound and the food won't go away because you're not presenting the sound. So those 2 bars should decrease. So this is one of the reasons why it's a kind of a mystery in terms of why gambling addiction occurs. Because you'll see that as soon as Snippy is not being reinforced and the sound of the hopper is muted, Snippy very quickly gives up on bar pressing. It does not take Snippy very long to figure out bar pressing is no longer working. You know, I'm going to leave. So how is it that people at a casino can go on for a long time and can go on long losing streaks where they've lost, you know, a bunch of times in a row, where they've basically done the behavior but not been reinforced with money? Why don't they do what Snippy does and just decide, I'm not going to bar press anymore, I'm going to be leaving this casino? They've extinguished my behavior. So why is it that people will continue to gamble in the face of these losses? Well, one of the reasons for that comes from the idea that we're going to see in Snippy exercise 8, which is the effect of secondary reinforcement. So a secondary reinforcer, this is a stimulus that acts as a reinforcer depending upon its prior association with a primary reinforcer. This is a stimulus that was associated or paired with a primary reinforcer, a reinforcer that you don't have to train. And this one was associated with that so that it then also has reinforcing properties. And the secondary reinforcer that we were using in our experiment was the sound. So sound early on in the magazine training was presented with food. Food is the unconditioned stimulus, leads to the unconditioned response of approach. After being paired over and over in magazine training, that sound turned to a conditioned stimulus. That conditioned stimulus acts as a secondary reinforcer. So you can actually present that sound as a reinforcer for pressing the bar. It will actually increase the probability of that bar press. So after conditioning, you can use the sound as a conditioned stimulus to cause the conditioned response of approach. But more importantly, you can actually reinforce approach. You can reinforce bar pressing using the sound. And again, the sound has become that secondary reinforcer. So how are we going to take a look at the effects of this secondary reinforcer? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to go through extinction one more time. So for this, excuse me, for assignment number 8, go back to assignment number 5, where Snippy was just learning to bar press. Do not start assignment number 8 right after assignment number 7, because you've gone through extinction with Snippy. You need a bar pressing Snippy to do assignment number 8, the effects of secondary reinforcement. So for assignment number 8, again, reopen your Snippy file number 5. Start with a Snippy that's bar pressing, that has all of those strong associations, and you're going to go through the process of extinction one more time. Now, before we get that, just real quick, I just wanted to point out that when the bar was muted, when the hopper was muted, notice that Snippy went through like one carriage return of the cumulative recorder. He peaked out, went back down, and then stopped within one of these cycles, you can think of it, of the cumulative recorder. That's all it took to go through that extinction procedure. What happens now that we're going to go through the extinction process, but this time without muting the pellet dispenser? So what you're going to do is you're going to go excuse me, back into that design and operant conditioning experiment. You're going to continue with, you're going to choose extinction, but this time you are going to unmute the pellet dispenser. So choose, unselect that mute the pellet dispenser. Now what I'll be looking for is this extinction not muted. So what that means is that every time Snippy presses the bar, Snippy's going to hear this, but he's not going to get any food, right? So the primary reinforcer is gone, the food is gone. However, that secondary reinforcer of the actual sound is still there. And what we're looking for, and what you'll see, is that Snippy will continue to press that bar. Actually, when you go through extinction, there's often an increase in the frequency of a response. It's called the extinction burst. But what you're going to find is that Snippy is going to continue to press that bar and will continue pressing the bar with no food being delivered for much, much longer than when that hopper was muted. So Snippy will try for 1 cycle, 2 cycles, 3 cycles, 4 cycles, 5 cycles, 6 cycles, before you get this action strength back down to 0. So the mere presence of that secondary reinforcer kept Snippy going for a much longer time when he wasn't actually receiving the primary reinforcer than if that secondary reinforcer was absent. All right, so that's what I'm going to be looking for, that much longer period of extinction. Make sure you run it until that action strength is back down to 0. So what does this tell us about our gamblers here? Well, this is one of the reasons why gambling with slot machines can be so addictive, even when you're not winning money. So even when you're not getting payouts, even when you're on a losing streak, even when you're going through and you've been on a long losing streak, people will not go through the process of extinction because of these secondary reinforcers. So we've already seen sound can be a secondary reinforcer. So you can get reinforced for pressing that button just by hearing those ding, ding, dings and those other sounds that used to be or that were previously associated with winning. But this is also why that tumbler design is used in almost every single slot machine. So whether it's the older style mechanical slot machines or whether they're the computer screen newer slot machines, they still use this, bit by bit, column by column reveal of whether or not you won. And it has to do with the effect of doing those one at a time. So you first get that output right there, and then you get a second one, and maybe you have a match. And then you're eagerly waiting the third one, and if you get a match there, you win yourself some money. So what happens during early conditioning when you've just sat down at the slot machine? Let's say that this is your first time playing. You gone to the casino to see, your favorite act in concert. They've given you $20 in free tokens. You sat down at the slot machine, first time there. What's the situation going on? Well, during the early conditioning, that first match, let's say that you don't even know how a slot machine really works. That first match, that first outcome there, let's say that it's a cherry. That's a neutral stimulus, right? You see the cherry, you're kind of like, all right, not too bad, cherry, it's fine. I don't hate it, I don't love it. Neutral stimulus. Match number 2 occurs. You get another cherry. You're like, all right, no biggie, 2 cherries, neutral stimulus. Match number 3 occurs. Third cherry. You're sitting there and you're like, still, neutral stimulus. It's not bad. Then you get the money. You get that output. You get that ding, ding, ding. You want the jackpot. Ooh, the money starts pouring out. Money is an unconditioned stimulus. You can technically say it's a secondary reinforcer, but we're just so used to money, we can think of it as an unconditioned stimulus. And that leads to a positive emotion, right? So that leads to that positive emotion whenever you end up with a lot of money. So what happens when you have this classical conditioning setup? You have match 1, match 2, match 3, all being neutral stimuli. Well, match 3 is the one that's followed by money, right? Match 3 is the neutral stimulus that is followed by the unconditioned stimulus. So match 3 becomes the initial first conditioned stimulus. So through classical conditioning, match number 3 goes from being a neutral stimulus to a conditioned stimulus. And then what happens is that conditioned stimulus, through higher order conditioning, changes this neutral stimulus into a secondary conditioned stimulus. And then this conditioned stimulus, through higher order conditioning, changes this neutral stimulus into a higher order third conditioned stimulus. So what this means is that now you have match 1 acting as a conditioned stimulus. You have match 2 acting as a conditioned stimulus. You have match number 3 acting as a conditioned stimulus. And all of these conditioned responses cause the positive emotion, all these conditioned stimuli cause the positive emotion, which is the conditioned response. So we got 3 conditioned stimuli now that are causing the positive emotion of a conditioned response. Any questions on that so far? All right, so what does this mean? Why is this so effective? Well, what it means is that after conditioning, after you've won a few times, after maybe you've seen other people win a few times, after those neutral stimuli turn into conditioned stimulus, after conditioning, when that first match comes, when that second match comes, and when that third match comes, you've already been reinforced because of this secondary conditioning, because of this secondary reinforcer, this conditioned stimulus. So once again, they want to get you to button press. That's the operant response. They don't want to reinforce you with money. That's not the way gambling works. It only works if they make more money than they pay out. So how else can they reinforce you? Well, when you button press, you're going to get that first match. It does not matter what comes up. If cherries come up, guess what? That's a match for 3 cherries. If a diamond comes up, that's a match for 3 diamonds. If a 7 comes up, that's a match for 3 sevens. So whatever that first stimulus is, you already get reinforced for pressing that button when that first column stops. So even if the rest of that particular trial is a disaster, you've still been reinforced for button pressing by that first match. If you match the second column, right, so if it comes up 7, you get reinforced. If the next column comes up 7, then you get reinforced a second time for button pressing. So you've gotten 2 reinforcements for button pressing, increasing the probability that you're going to button press in the future, and you haven't even matched 3 of them. So if it comes up 7, you get reinforced. 7, you get reinforced. Diamond, you get no money whatsoever. You don't get reinforced. However, notice that you've already been reinforced twice for pressing that button. And the reason that you've been reinforced twice is because they did it one at a time. And it has that secondary conditioning through higher order classical conditioning. So that's a rather straightforward example. And you can imagine the number of secondary reinforcers. You can imagine the sheer amount of conditioning that is occurring when the outputs look like that. And you have, what do we got there? 15 different outcomes that are probably being done one column at a time. You can imagine the sheer amount of reinforcement that you'll get because you will have so many matches, even if you don't get paid off. These matches act as these secondary reinforcers. And that's one of the reasons why people will be on a losing streak. People will not see the primary reinforcer of money in a long, long time, but they'll still sit there, press that bar, pull that lever, because they're getting that secondary reinforcement from those staggered matches. All right, any questions about that? All right, so the last exercise, I believe that's due coming up, Snippy exercise number 9, spontaneous recovery. So this is where you get back your bar pressing behavior in the Snippy that you've gone through extinction with. So this is a reappearance of a previously extinguished operationally conditioned response that occurs after the animal is returned to a testing situation after just taking a break, after just spending some time outside of the cage. So we've seen spontaneous recovery in classical conditioning. Now we're going to see spontaneous recovery in operant conditioning. Yep.
The save file from the number 7 or the number 8?
That's up to you. So all you need to do is use one of your extinguished Sniffies. I will say this, spontaneous recovery is more likely to occur if you use the file from number 7 where you've muted the hopper. It should occur for both, but it's been my experience that students report it's much more likely to occur if you use your file from exercise number 7. All right, so what you're going to be doing in this one, once again, you go to your file here, but this time you just remove Snippy for timeout. And what this is, it's just a feature of the experiment where Snippy is taken out of the operant chamber for a virtual 24 hours and then immediately return. So once you are ready to go, you can just hit OK. It'll literally take you 5 seconds to put Snippy in timeout. It's 24 hours for Snippy. You want to make sure that Snippy is still not being reinforced for bar pressing. So do not turn on that bar pressing reinforcement. Keep it in extinction mode. So again, if you just open up file number 7, it'll take care of that automatically. And after timeout, so I'll be looking for that timeout, you're looking for a bar press. And what you're looking for is that spontaneous recovery. So without being reinforced, right? You see there's no little slashes there. Snippy is not getting any food. Without being reinforced, you should see a recovery of that behavior. You should see a recovery of those button presses, the bar presses, followed by, once again, extinction. So that's what I'm going to be looking for. All right, so if you don't get it, if you put Snippy in timeout, and for some reason when he comes back, he does not start bar pressing again, get rid of this file, reopen, number 7 again, and just give it a second try. I'm looking for that initial increase with no reinforcement of that bar pressing behavior, followed again by the decrease, that extinction. So just to kind of show you how robust this is, you don't have to do this, but I put Snippy in timeout twice when I was going through this. So you put him in timeout once, he spontaneously recovers that behavior of bar pressing, goes through extinction. You put him through timeout again, and he will recover one more time. I didn't try it for a third time, but I assume it'll be less than previously. You only have to do it the once, but definitely make sure that you get that increase in bar press. If you don't, redo it, start it up again. And this is one of the reasons, just to tie it into gambling behavior, this is one of the reasons why many treatments of addictive behavior stick to the principle or stick to the idea that you're going to go through extinction to get rid of the behavior, and then you are never allowed to go back into that particular behavior. So if you get treated for gambling addiction, one of the principles that they'll probably tell you in your treatment is that for the rest of your life, you are no longer able to go to a casino. So not just don't go to a casino for gambling, you cannot go to casinos. So if your favorite artist is coming to town and they're going to be up at a casino and you've been dying your entire life to see them live in concert, too bad, you are not allowed to go back to that casino. And Alcoholics Anonymous has the same kind of principle for drinking. It's not controlled. It's not a controlled amount of alcohol consumption. It's zero amount of alcohol consumption. And especially early on, you don't get to go to bars. You don't get to go to places where drinks are being served. So why do they have this particular principle? Well, part of the reason is because of this spontaneous recovery. So just like Snippy, for some reason, had that urge to bar press just because he took a break from that particular environment, just because Snippy went through that extinction procedure and then went home and was placed back in the operant conditioning chamber, that placing him back in the environment led to a recovery of that operant behavior, led to a recovery of the strength of that operant behavior. And that's what these treatment programs are trying to avoid. So if you take a break from the casinos, go through the extinction process so that you're no longer compelled to go gamble, and you then step into a casino again, it's like that timeout procedure, and you run the risk of having that spontaneous recovery, having that recovery of the strength of that operant response, and that's why a lot of people relapse when they get put back into an environment because of this idea of spontaneous recovery. Excuse me. All right, so those are the those are the assignments for Snippy 4 to 9. Those are the ones that are due upcoming. I changed the due date on them so that you'll have time to complete those. Numbers 4 and 5, again, give yourself some extra time. Those ones might take longer than you expect, but they're very doable. You will succeed. The last thing that I'll mention, though, is if everything goes wrong and you just cannot get Snippy to bar press, for exercises 7, 8, and 9, feel free to use Snippy, the one that's included that's already trained to bar press. So just in case you just can't get it done, open up the Snippy that's already trained. Feel free to do 7, 8, and 9 using that already trained Snippy. But again, for part 4 and part 5, assignments 4 and 5, I need to see that you're using a naive Snippy, one that doesn't already bar press. All right, any questions before we wrap it up for today? All right, so that is it. So next time when we meet, we'll take a look at schedules of reinforcement, particularly intermittent schedules of reinforcement. What happens to behavior when you don't get reinforced every single time you press that bar? But as of today, we are done. So if you haven't already signed in, please come to the front and sign in. Otherwise, we are done for today.